Restrictions on student reassignment in public schools. While charters seem to be able to discard students at will, public schools have the exact opposite circumstance. CPS management has forced public school principals to keep students who violently beat other students and attack teachers and principals. The following is a real-life example, and it is representative of a much larger phenomenon. At a Southside school, over a 6-month period, a male middle school student did the following. Attacked and beat a classmate who had to be hospitalized with a concussion. Struck an assistant principal who made sexual advances toward staff members. Tried to physically assault an 8th grade teacher twice. Beat a female student with a belt. The principal then reached out to the network, law, safety, and security 7 times for assistance, including a request for therapeutic placement, but got no support for that request. As a direct result of their refusal to reassign this student, the principal sustained a contusion and had to go to the emergency room when the student punched her in the chest because she stood in front of the student to prevent him from attacking a substitute teacher. While the principal was out on medical leave, the student punched a hole in a wooden door. The student punched a hole in a wooden door when he couldn't get to the administrator in charge, and that is the door. The principal told me that the way he punched that door was the way he punched her chest. But CPS management kept the student in the school, telling the principal, "It's your building, you handle it." It wasn't until the student attacked the downtown safety and security manager and his security officer, the white coats, that the district finally removed the student. This further incentivizes parents to remove their children from public schools for safety concerns. This phenomenon has perverted the very meaning of parental choice because the school choice ideology assumes there's a level playing field and that parents will just pick the better school. But we've shown 2 examples, and there are far more than 2, that incentivize parents to pick charters for reasons that have nothing to do with school quality. 2 questions related to that scenario. The first, for students who commit violent acts or are chronically and intensely disruptive, will you direct your Board of Education to update the Student Code of Conduct to allow public school principals to have these students reassigned to a therapeutic setting that can meet their social, emotional, and behavioral needs while improving order and safety in our public schools?
Okay, so let me respond to the first question. If you remember, and we go back a long way, we had, and my opponent attacks me about you started the expulsion policy, or you were expelling kids. We had a 0 tolerance policy for student misconduct. The student discipline code was clear and defined. Parents were clearly informed. And the reason that we opened more alternative schools, the reason that the majority of the charter schools that we opened were alternative schools for students who had violated the 0 tolerance policy, for students that had been released from incarceration and returned to the schools, for students who had chronically been disruptive. And the reason we spent so much money on special ed outplacements was to deal with this issue. What we wanted to do was to be tough, to have a 0 tolerance policy, to have a code of conduct, to require character education and compulsive community service and things like that, to really focus on student behavioral issues, but at the same time, be tough on students that were disruptive in all schools, in traditional schools. We didn't have that many charters, so obviously the issues just by a magnitude were in the traditional schools, particularly in the high schools. But we didn't want to send anybody to the street. And we adopted a 0 tolerance policy, and I get attacked for that all the time, saying I'm targeting. We just basically said you can't have students that are a threat to either faculty or other students in the schools, and we need to create a network of alternative schools for that purpose. When I went to Philadelphia, I rejected 37 charter school proposals from the state board that had been created to oversee the district. And I think we approved like 14 charter schools. Most of those schools were alternative schools. I was actually opening schools to have a place where students could go who were overage, underachieving, and could not return to school for some reason because they'd been out of school, and for students who violated the 0 tolerance policy. Because one of the biggest challenges that we faced in Philadelphia, likewise, was disruptive behavior. Again, chronic disruptive behavior by the same students in these high schools. I remember it was a constant issue to tackle. So my approach has always been to have a tough disciplinary policy that was clear to everyone, while at the same time creating and expanding an alternative schools network that could provide for those educational services. So I have always felt that one of the most effective use for charters is actually to create charter schools that will serve the alternative school population. I like to think that at least in terms of in Chicago, we had more alternative schools for that student population than we had for, say the a mainstream student population. And I think that can be an effective role for charters. You can create and you can solicit proposals for charter schools that serve unique populations that need to be in a setting other than perhaps a traditional school setting. So I support where you're coming from. It has been a chronic challenge. But if you had no charters at all, you would still have that issue. You would still have the issue of the central administrations forcing you to take students who have been chronically disruptive and sometimes potentially disruptive and posing dangers to not only other students, but also faculty. So you need to create a network of alternative school placements that gives you a vehicle for addressing that need. Because this is an issue that's been an issue and it continues to be an issue. And I think that things are getting worse.
While the principal was away, the student punched the door. And what that principal told me was that the same way he punched that door, that's how he punched my chest. So the question is, for students who commit violent acts or are chronically and intensely disruptive, will you direct the Board of Education to update the Student Code of Conduct to allow school principals to have these students reassigned to a therapeutic setting that can meet their social, emotional, and behavioral needs while improving order and safety in our public schools?
Yeah, thank you for, even as harsh as this is, I do appreciate the recognition of this child's humanity, right? Because as we know as educators, we deal with every societal ill that this child has been exposed to. All of the breakdowns that have occurred over the course of a child's life, that they did then take that frustration out on the people who are close to them, who they know love them. And those are our educators and administrators. We absolutely have to make sure that we are giving administrators the authority and the leadership to be able to come collectively together with all the other administrators and teachers in the building to devise an education plan that's healthy for this child, while also making sure that the type of structure that has to take place in the building is not disrupted because of, obviously the mental health crisis and the trauma and the damage that has been done to this child. And so we have to do that and provide that autonomy for principals to be able to guide a student in a setting that is healthier for everyone, because it's about protecting everyone, right? This also means that we have to have more mental health counselors, social workers, therapists on site that can actually help children as we see signs in many cases well before it gets to this point. And then in the instance when our local support is not enough, we have to make sure that the principal and all of the team has the ability to move this child in a setting that will be healthy for them, as well as making sure that we are providing the type of infrastructure for the rest of the students as well, and the staff, administrators.